Billy's world of cash. The Man in Black's baritone vibrated through Billy's small room, a low rumble that settled the storm inside him. He sat cross-legged on the floor, the worn vinyl spinning on his record player. Ring of Fire filled the air, Johnny's voice a comforting presence in the swirling chaos of Billy's day. Outside, Mrs. Henderson's prize-winning roses probably bloomed crimson, and the mockingbirds probably chirped their endless song, but in here, it was just Billy and Johnny. He knew every lyric, every guitar riff, every subtle inflection. The music was a fortress, a predictable landscape in a world that shifted without warning. He closed his eyes, picturing Johnny on stage, bathed in the spotlight, his guitar gleaming. Billy imagined himself there too, invisible in the shadows, absorbing the music, safe. Earlier that day, at school, the red balloon had burst. Not a real balloon, but the metaphorical one Mrs. Davis used to explain how stress worked. Billy's balloon popped during group reading. The squeak of the whiteboard marker, the chattering of the other children, the smell of the peanut butter sandwich someone was eating, it all coalesced into a pressure that squeezed his chest. He couldn't focus on the words, let alone participate. He just wanted to be home, with Johnny. He traced the grooves on the record sleeve with his fingertip, a repetitive motion that grounded him. Johnny Cash. A hero in denim and leather, singing about pain and redemption. Billy understood pain. Redemption was what he hoped for. Downstairs, Sarah stirred a pot of chicken soup, her brow furrowed. She glanced at the ceiling, listening to the familiar strains of Johnny Cash. It was a constant soundtrack to their lives. She worried. She worried about Billy fitting in, about him being happy, about the world being kind to him. The school had called again today. Another incident. Another misunderstanding. She climbed the stairs, the wooden steps creaking beneath her weight. She paused outside Billy's door, listening. The music pulsed, a steady heartbeat. She gently pushed the door open. Billy didn't acknowledge her. He was lost in his world of cash, a world of rhythm and rhyme, a world where everything made sense. His body rocked slightly, a subtle, almost imperceptible sway. He chewed on his lip, a habit he had when he was concentrating. Sarah watched him for a moment, her heart aching with a mixture of love and concern. She noticed the way his fingers traced the same line on the record sleeve over and over. The repetitive motion, the unwavering focus. It was a comfort, she knew. But was it enough? "Billy, honey?" she said softly. He didn't respond. The music was too loud, or maybe he was simply too far away. She walked into the room and knelt beside him. "Dinner's almost ready," she said, her voice gentle. He blinked, his eyes focusing on her. For a moment, he looked startled, as if he'd forgotten she existed. Then, a small, shy smile touched his lips. "Johnny," he said, his voice barely a whisper. Sarah smiled back, her eyes glistening. "Yes, honey. Johnny." She knew she couldn't fix everything, but she could be here, in his world, listening with him. And sometimes that was enough. Understanding Billy. He just sees the world differently, Tom. That's all, Sarah said, stirring sugar into her tea, the spoon clinking softly against the ceramic. Tom watched her, his brow furrowed. Different how, Sarah? He won't look people in the eye. He lines up his toy cars for hours. And the meltdowns, they're getting worse. Billy was upstairs, lost in his own world, no doubt immersed in Johnny Cash. The rhythmic strumming of Ring of Fire pulsed faintly through the floorboards. "I know," Sarah sighed, the weight of her worry settling visibly on her shoulders. "I've made an appointment with Dr. Evans. She specializes in, well, she'll know more." The waiting room smelled of antiseptic and old magazines. Billy sat rigidly beside Sarah, his fingers tracing the worn pattern on his jeans. When Dr. Evans finally called them in, Billy refused to make eye contact, answering her questions with monosyllabic grunts. Tom felt a knot of anxiety tighten in his stomach. After what felt like an eternity of tests and observations, Dr. Evans sat back, her expression gentle. "Billy shows several characteristics consistent with autism spectrum disorder. The words hung in the air, heavy and unfamiliar. Sarah felt a strange mix of relief and dread. Relief that there was a reason, a name for what they were experiencing. Dread at the unknown path ahead. The doctor recommended resources, books, support groups. Sarah absorbed it all, her mind racing. Back home, after Billy was asleep, she devoured the pamphlets Dr. Evans had given them. The clinical terms blurred into a sea of confusing jargon. She needed something more, something real. She found a book online, The Autistic Brain, and its descriptions resonated deeply. Sensory overload, repetitive behaviors, a need for routine, it was Billy. The book spoke of finding connections through special interests. For Billy, that was undoubtedly Johnny Cash. An idea sparked. Sarah pulled out her old guitar, untouched for years. It was out of tune, the strings rusty, but she remembered a few chords. She started strumming a simple version of Folsom Prison Blues, her voice shaky. A moment later, Billy appeared in the doorway, his eyes wide. He didn't speak, but his gaze was fixed on the guitar. Sarah continued to play, haltingly, then stopped. Billy stepped closer, pointing to a chord. That's a minor, he whispered, his voice barely audible. Sarah's heart leaped. You know your chords? Billy nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. He picked up the guitar, his fingers surprisingly nimble. He began to play, the melody flowing smoothly, filling the room with the mournful sound of Johnny Cash. For the first time in a long time, Sarah felt a flicker of hope, a bridge being built between their worlds, note by note. The concert dream. The newspaper lay sprawled on the kitchen table, a battlefield of ink and newsprint after Tom's hurried breakfast. Billy, meticulously stacking toast crusts into a tiny log cabin, usually ignored it. But today, a bold headline snagged his attention. The Man in Black rides again. Johnny Cash live at the Civic Center. Billy's breath hitched. Johnny Cash. Live. He forgot the toast cabin architecture and carefully unfolded the paper, his fingers tracing the blurry photo of Johnny holding his guitar. The Civic Center. That was big. Loud. But Johnny Cash. He scrambled to the living room, the newspaper clutched to his chest like a winning lottery ticket. Sarah was humming softly as she watered her African violets, the morning sunlight catching the dust motes dancing in the air. Mom! Mom! Johnny Cash! Concert! He thrust the newspaper at her, pointing a trembling finger at the ad. Sarah took the paper, her eyebrows arching. Oh, honey, that's wonderful. You really like Johnny Cash, don't you? Billy nodded so vigorously his glasses nearly slipped off. Ring of Fire, Folsom Prison Blues, all of them. Live, Mom! I have to go. The words tumbled out in a rush, the excitement bubbling inside him like a shaken soda. Sarah smiled, but Billy saw a flicker of something else in her eyes, worry. We'll see, sweetie. Let's talk to Dad about it. That evening, after supper, meatloaf, mashed potatoes, and peas, each meticulously separated on Billy's plate. The concert was the main topic. Billy sat on the floor, meticulously arranging and rearranging his collection of polished rocks, listening intently. I know how much he loves Johnny Cash, Sarah said, her voice low. But the Civic Center, it's going to be packed. And loud, Tom. Really loud. Tom sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. I know, honey. But look at his face, Sarah. He's never wanted anything this much. He glanced at Billy, whose rock arrangement had stalled, his gaze fixed on his parents. We could get him those noise-canceling headphones, Sarah suggested. The ones Dr. Lewis recommended. That's a thought, Tom conceded. But it's more than just the noise, Sarah. It's the crowds, the lights, the whole sensory overload. Remember the Christmas parade last year? Sarah winced. Billy had dissolved into a screaming, sobbing mess, overwhelmed by the flashing lights and the crush of bodies. They'd had to leave almost immediately. Maybe we could go early, Sarah mused. See if we can find a spot near the back, away from the speakers. And we can bring his weighted blanket. Just in case. Tom nodded slowly. We could try. But we have to be prepared to leave if it gets to be too much for him. No arguments, Billy, okay? Billy looked up, his eyes wide and earnest. Okay, Dad. I promise. He returned to his rocks, his small hands carefully placing a piece of quartz next to a smooth piece of granite. The civic center. The noise. The crowds. He could handle it. He had to. It was Johnny Cash. Preparing for the show. The tickets felt stiff and important in Tom's hand. He'd managed to snag them after weeks of relentless refreshing on the Ticketmaster website, a small victory against the odds. He knelt beside Billy, who was meticulously arranging his collection of Johnny Cash records. Hey, Billy-o, Tom said carefully. Got a surprise for you. Billy didn't look up, his focus laser-locked on the album covers. Tom held out the tickets. Guess who's coming to town? Slowly, Billy's gaze lifted, landing first on Tom's face, then flickering down to the tickets. He picked one up, turning it over in his hands, his brow furrowed in concentration as he traced the printed letters with his finger. Johnny Cash? He whispered, his voice barely audible. The one and only. Next Friday night. Billy's eyes widened, a flicker of something akin to joy sparking within them. He opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again. Real? Real as rain, pal. But, Tom added quickly, seeing the almost manic excitement begin to bubble. We only go if you promise me something. If it gets too loud, too much, anything, we leave. No arguments. Deal? Billy nodded vigorously, his enthusiasm momentarily tempered by a flash of anxiety. Deal. Sarah was already in full planning mode. The concert was 5 days away, but her mental checklist was long and detailed. She laid out a backpack on the kitchen table. Noise-canceling headphones, check. Small water bottle, check. Emergency granola bar, check. She held up a soft, faded blue blanket. And of course, Mr. Blue. Billy reached for the blanket, his fingers tracing the worn edges. It had been his constant companion since he was a toddler. Safe. Exactly, Sarah said, folding it carefully into the bag. We'll sit near the aisle, okay? That way, if you need to step out for a minute, it's easy. And Daddy and I will take turns keeping an eye on you, making sure you're comfortable. She paused, her brow furrowing slightly. We can leave at any time, Billy. No pressure at all. This is for you, but your comfort comes first. Tom added, we can even watch from the car if it gets to be too much. Just being there, knowing he's singing nearby, might be enough. Billy considered this, his expression thoughtful. The idea of actually being inside, hearing the music live, was intoxicating, but the thought of the crowd, the noise, the sheer sensory overload was daunting. He clutched Mr. Blue a little tighter. Try, he said finally, his voice firm despite the slight tremor in his hands. I want to try. The arena of sound. The stadium's clamor crashed over Billy, a tangible force. A maelstrom of sound, competing scents, and pressing bodies threatened to engulf him entirely. He recoiled, fingers digging into Sarah's arm for purchase. The arena throbbed, a living entity with chaotic currents that seemed to resonate within his very bones. Easy, sweetie, breathe, Sarah soothed, her hand covering his. Her voice, typically a tranquil stream, sounded thin and strained against the uproar. She scanned the surroundings, a crease forming between her brows. Almost there. Just a little further. Too much, Billy managed, his voice a mere breath against the wall of noise. He clutched his trusty, time-softened blue blanket tighter, the familiar cotton a welcome tether to reality amid the swirling pandemonium. He loathed crowds. Hated the unpredictable surges, the relentless sonic assault, the casual disregard as people bumped and jostled. Sarah navigated him through the human river, her touch a constant reassurance. They finally reached their seats, perched in the upper reaches, but Sarah had insisted. Best I could snag, Billy boy, she'd said, giving his hand a squeeze. He didn't care about the altitude, only about hearing Johnny. He rummaged in his pack for his noise-canceling headphones. The instant they sealed, a blessed hush descended. The crowd's roar softened to a distant drone. The pushing mass became a blurred, silent pantomime. He closed his eyes, letting the quiet recenter him. Beside him, Sarah's face mirrored her own anxiety. Her gaze flickered towards him, her lips forming unspoken questions. He knew her silent inquiry. Was this a mistake? Was he all right? The house lights faded. A hush rippled through the audience, a collective holding of breath. Then, a single spotlight pierced the darkness. A figure materialized within its beam, a stark silhouette. Johnny Cash. A tide of pure, unadulterated joy surged through Billy. He shed the noise, the press of bodies, the suffocating feeling of being overwhelmed. All vanished save the man on stage. The opening chords of Ring of Fire erupted, even through the aural barrier of his headphones. That signature boom-chicka-boom rhythm thrummed in his chest, a comforting, deeply familiar cadence. Then Johnny began to sing. His voice, a rich baritone, sliced through the remaining noise like a laser, finding its mark directly in Billy's soul. Billy's face illuminated. A genuine smile bloomed, unforced and bright. He swayed gently, lost in the music's embrace, the blanket a comforting talisman in his hands. He silently mouthed the lyrics, each word a cherished jewel. Sarah watched, her own apprehension dissolving, replaced by profound relief. For the first time since their arrival, she truly relaxed. This was it. This was precisely what he needed. This was pure, unmitigated happiness. He was more than okay. He was home. A voice in the crowd. The bass vibrated through Billy, a palpable pulse against his sternum. The light show, typically a trigger for his anxiety, felt different tonight, grounded. Anchored to the music, yes, but more importantly to Johnny. He swayed, the rhythm coaxing him forward, chasing away the internal buzz of unease. He clutched the familiar comfort of his threadbare Johnny Cash tee, its faded cotton a soothing anchor beneath his sweaty palms. His mom squeezed his shoulder. "You okay?" A simple nod was all he could manage, the question bubbling to the surface yet choked by the overwhelming intensity. He returned her squeeze, a silent promise. Better than okay. He was. Here. The concert surged. Folsom Prison Blues morphed into Ring of Fire, each song a well-worn story etched in Billy's memory. He mouthed the lyrics, a private harmony to Johnny's gravelly baritone, lost in the ocean of faces. The crowd, normally a source of overwhelming stimulation, felt muted, as if the music had woven a protective cocoon around him. Then, a momentary hush. The final chords faded, the lights dimmed a fraction, and the arena exploded with applause. A tidal wave of sound threatened to engulf Billy, but instead of retreating, he met it head-on, a surfer riding the crest. This was it. His chance encounter. No plan, no rehearsal, just instinct. A torrent of pure, unadulterated emotion, years of adoration coalescing in a single moment. It erupted from him, an untamed shout piercing the clamor. "I love you, Johnny Cash!" The words, surprisingly resonant, cut through the noise, hanging in the sudden quiet like a beacon. In its wake, regret washed over him. Shame prickled his skin. He hadn't meant to be so exposed. He recoiled, burying his face in his mother's side, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. Eyes burning into him, he was sure, his moment irretrievably shattered. His mother's arm tightened around him, a quiet reassurance, a steady warmth against the internal maelstrom. He remained hidden, dreading the inevitable judgment. Then, filtering through his inner turmoil, he heard it. A chuckle, deep and familiar. "Well, I love you too, son." Johnny Cash's voice resonated through the speakers, amplified yet somehow still intimate, direct. "What's your name?" The man in black sees. The rumble in Johnny's throat deepened, a low growl that resonated through the auditorium. He'd launched into Folsom Prison Blues. But the music felt wrong. Disjointed. He wasn't connecting. He strummed a chord, the sound hanging in the air, then abruptly stopped. The band faltered, unsure. A hush fell over the crowd, 1,000 expectant faces tilted upwards. "Hold up," Cash said, his voice a low drawl amplified by the microphone. He scanned the sea of faces, searching. He hadn't seen anything specific, just felt a disturbance in the force, a tremor of something. Then he remembered the shout. The one that had cut through the noise like a knife. "Someone yelled out just a minute ago," he said, his gaze sweeping across the balcony. "Said something important. I want to know who it was." A ripple of murmurs spread through the audience. Someone coughed nervously. Cash held his ground, the man in black unyielding. "Spotlight," he commanded, pointing vaguely towards the back of the auditorium. "Find him. Find the boy who shouted." The spotlight swung into action, a blinding beam slicing through the darkness, momentarily disorienting. It danced erratically at first, illuminating startled faces, sequined dresses, and then it settled on Billy Thompson. The stark light revealed everything. His wide, anxious eyes, the way his small hands twisted together, the headphones pushed back around his neck. He looked like a trapped animal, caught in the headlights. His father put a comforting arm around him. Cash saw it all. The raw vulnerability, the overwhelming anxiety radiating from the boy like heat. He also saw something else, a deep, abiding love. A connection to the music that transcended mere fandom. "Hey there, son," Cash said, his voice softening, the edges of the man in black momentarily dissolving to reveal the man beneath. "What's your name?" Billy flinched, but his gaze remained fixed on the stage. He swallowed hard, his throat bobbing. The microphone picked up the faint rasp of his breath. "Billy," he whispered, barely audible. "Billy," Cash repeated, testing the name on his tongue. "That's a good name. Billy, what's your favorite song?" The silence stretched, thick with anticipation. Billy's fingers twisted faster, his knuckles white. His dad squeezed his shoulder. Finally, he spoke, his voice gaining a sliver of strength. "Riders in the Sky. Backstage Magic." The last echo of Ring of Fire still resonated within Billy when the beam landed on him. It was Cash, a dark figure framed by the stage lights, singling him out. A wave of whispers cascaded through the audience. "That young fella." Cash's voice, both booming and intimate, filled the arena. "The one, lost in the music. I want him and his family backstage afterwards. Get them past the gatekeepers." Billy's mouth fell open. Sarah's excited squeeze nearly cut off the circulation to his fingers. "Billy! Johnny Cash! He wants to meet you!" Disbelief and pure joy wrestled within him. He fought the urge to leap up and cheer, his limbs suddenly leaden. Sensing something unique unfolding, the crowd roared its approval, the sound of physical force. The sudden attention sent a nervous shiver down his spine. The rest of the concert passed in a daze. Sarah's radiant smile never faltered as she kept meeting his gaze. Even his father, a man of few public emotions, gave his shoulder a comforting squeeze. Finally, the house lights illuminated the departing masses in their slow creep towards the exits. Sarah, a woman on a mission, expertly piloted them through the throng, murmuring apologies and "excuse me's." Backstage was an alien landscape, a chaotic network of wires, scurrying roadies, and the sharp tang of sweat mingling with stale coffee. A hulking figure with a headset, his face carved in granite, stopped them in their tracks. Sarah, her mom credentials at the ready, stated, "We were invited by Johnny Cash." The man scanned his clipboard, his lips silently mouthing words. A curt nod. "Right. This way. But keep it snappy. Mr. Cash is under a tight schedule." He guided them down a tight corridor, thick with palpable anticipation. Billy's palms grew damp, and he wiped them against his jeans. The receding roar of the audience gave way to the clatter of equipment and hushed voices. They halted before a door adorned with a lone star. The guard rapped sharply, then opened the door, gesturing for them to enter. The room proved surprisingly small and basic, just a pair of chairs, a table strewn with discarded water bottles, and a rack overflowing with stark black garments. And then, there he was. Johnny Cash. He was even more imposing up close, his face a roadmap of a life richly experienced. He was engaged in conversation with a suited man, but he paused mid-sentence as he spotted them. A genuine smile crinkled his weathered face. "Well, howdy, folks," he greeted them, his voice a low rumble. He dismissed the man with a flick of his wrist. Come on in, come on in." With surprising grace, he moved towards Billy. Then, unexpectedly, he knelt, bringing himself to eye level. The disarming gesture, so profoundly sincere, eased some of Billy's apprehension. "I saw you out there, son," Cash murmured. "You were really listening. That means the world to me. What's your name?" Billy's throat constricted. Billy," he managed to stammer. "Billy," Cash repeated, savoring the name. "I like that. Tell me, Billy, what do you get up to when you're not listening to old coots like me croon?" "Walking the line." The pick felt warm in his palm, a direct conduit to Johnny Cash. He reread the note for the 10th time, the looping script a secret code meant only for him. "Billy, keep walking the line. Your friend J. See?" He traced the letters with his finger, the ink slightly raised. The memory of the sound check replayed behind his eyes, the deep rumble of Johnny's voice, the click of his boots on the stage, the way the spotlight had turned his silver hair into a halo. And the guitar. He'd actually held Johnny Cash's guitar. The heavy wood had vibrated against his chest as he strummed a clumsy chord. Sarah, her eyes shining with unshed tears, had snapped a photo. Billy imagined the photo, tucked safely into his scrapbook, a talisman against the loneliness that sometimes threatened to swallow him whole. Back home, the pick found its place on his bedside table, next to the framed picture of him with his hero. He spent the next few days practicing guitar, the chords slowly solidifying in his fingers. He even started humming "Ring of Fire" under his breath, a feat that made Sarah beam. One afternoon, Sarah sat beside him on his bed, fiddling with the worn edge of his comforter. "Billy," she began, her voice laced with a familiar blend of hope and apprehension. "I was thinking, maybe you could start a Johnny Cash fan club at school." Billy froze, his fingers still on the guitar strings. The idea was both exhilarating and terrifying. School was a minefield of unspoken rules and social cues he rarely understood. But the thought of sharing his passion, of finding others who understood the power of that deep, resonant voice, was intoxicating. I don't know, Mom," he mumbled, his gaze fixed on the worn carpet. "What if no one wants to join?" Sarah squeezed his hand. "Then you'll have a very exclusive club of one. But I have a feeling there are more Johnny Cash fans at Northwood than you think. And even if there aren't, it will be something that's yours. A place where you get to be yourself, completely." The thought lingered, a warm ember in his chest. He imagined standing in front of a group of kids, talking about Johnny Cash, about the stories in his songs, about the man who had looked him in the eye and told him to keep walking the line. The next day, armed with a stack of photocopied flyers featuring the pictures Sarah had taken of him with Johnny's guitar, Billy stood by the school's notice board during lunch. His heart hammered against his ribs. He watched as students hurried past, their laughter and chatter a confusing cacophony. He almost bolted, the flyers clutched in his sweaty hands. Then, a girl with bright pink hair stopped, her eyes widening as she saw the picture. Is that Johnny Cash's guitar?" she asked, her voice filled with awe. Billy swallowed hard and nodded. He gave me a pick." The girl, whose name was Maya, according to the name tag on her denim jacket, grinned. "That's so cool. My grandpa used to play his records all the time. I love Folsom Prison Blues." Before he knew it, Billy was talking, the words tumbling out of him in a rush. He told Maya about the concert, about meeting Johnny Cash, about the pick, about the note. And as he spoke, a small crowd began to gather, drawn in by his enthusiasm. By the end of lunch, he had a list of names, a dozen potential members for the Northwood High Johnny Cash fan club. Walking the line, it seemed, wasn't quite so lonely after all.